the previous video, we discussed the role of the mouth in both mechanical and chemical digestion of food and the importance of the swallow reflex, which is used to push food to the back of the mouth and ultimately into the next organ of the digestive system, which is a 25 centimeter long tube made entirely of muscle, which is what we call your esophagus. And the primary function of the esophagus is simply connect the bottom of the mouth and the top of the stomach together in one continuous chain to allow swallowed food to pass from the back of your mouth ultimately to the stomach. Now, the most interesting component of the esophagus is actually how the muscles within the esophagus function and what it entails about digestion based on the position a human is in. For example, if we take a look at this person here doing a handstand, you would expect that their digestive system wouldn't be able to function because all the food would fall out of their mouth because of gravity, but this is actually not the case, and the reason behind why is the way that the muscular contractions in the esophagus work. Now, even though the esophagus is made entirely of muscle, the muscles within the esophagus do not contract all at once. When food is swallowed, the muscles at the top of the esophagus will contract and always transport the food in a single direction towards the stomach, regardless of whether the stomach is above or below the mouth. So when the contractions of the esophagus begin at the top, they push the food bolus down, and then muscles within the lower parts of the esophagus will then contract afterwards, pushing the food bolus a little bit farther down, followed by muscles slightly below that contracting, and so on and so on and so on, until the food ultimately is pushed through the whole esophagus and ultimately enters the stomach. Now, because this contraction, or these contractions rather, are very, very rhythmic and have very, very critical timing, we give them a special name, which is what we call peristalsis, or if you prefer the adjective form of this word, peristaltic contractions. And this allows food not just to move from one location to the other, but also allows it to move completely independently of gravity, which allows the food to travel upwards to the stomach, even if a person is doing a handstand like this. And we will see it isn't just the esophagus, but the entire digestive system that relies on peristalsis in order to push the food forward. Now, when we make it to the bottom of the esophagus, we're going to encounter a gateway that ultimately connects the esophagus with the stomach, which is what we call a sphincter. So this image here shows a ring of muscle that opens or closes depending on whether food is present. So this one is what we call the lower esophageal sphincter, because its job is to connect the lower part of the esophagus with the upper part of the stomach, allowing food to enter the top of the stomach for the next phase of digestion. You actually have two esophageal sphincters at the top of the esophagus, right below your Adam's apple or your larynx, the voice box where the vocal cords are, is a sphincter that opens up to the bulk of the esophagus, and this is what we call the upper esophageal sphincter. So the role of sphincters is ultimately to provide connection points between different digestive organs. So we're going to see that there is another sphincter at the bottom of the stomach that connects it to the intestines, and the job of the sphincter is either to open if there is food present or close in order to prevent any other substances such as air from being able to get into the digestive system, and also, most importantly, to prevent food moving backward through the digestive system, because again, peristalsis is only supposed to work in a single direction, and sphincters, these potential gateways between multiple digestive organs, are yet another countermeasure that stops food from being able to travel in the wrong direction. Now, if we go through the esophageal sphincter, we are going to enter probably the most well-known organ of the digestive system, which is the stomach, which is well known for being one of the most important centers of chemical digestion. But just like how the mouth unexpectedly is a site of chemical digestion, the stomach, rather unexpectedly, is actually an important site of mechanical digestion as well, and we can talk about how and why that is. If we look on the surface of the stomach, we can see that the walls of the stomach are not completely smooth. These folds within the stomach wall are structures that we call rugae, and these are actually visible creases in the muscular layer from outside of the stomach. So rugae are actually rather flexible because this allows the rugae, the actual muscles on the outside of the stomach wall, to relax in order to make the stomach bigger. And this is important because while you're eating, the stomach needs to be able to expand to accommodate more food that is being pushed into it through the esophagus. And here is where the mechanical digestion kicks in. Whenever there is muscular tissue, this means that the muscle can also contract, meaning that it's going to get smaller. So if the muscles in the stomach contract, they close inward and compress the food, much like the job of the esophagus does, which helps to pulverize it and break it down further mechanically. And this is why we say that the stomach is both a center of mechanical and chemical digestion. Your stomach can actually vary significantly in size, where an empty stomach actually has a relatively small volume of just under 100 milliliters, whereas a full stomach can accommodate up to a liter of food, again, due to the rugae's ability to relax in order to accommodate more space. Now, because these contractions exist, these contractions are not just used for mechanically compressing the food, but also for ultimately pushing the food out of the stomach, meaning that the muscular motion within the stomach is going to use peristalsis as well, in order to make sure that the food is pushed only in a single direction and generally cannot be transported back up the esophagus. So this job is to ultimately transport the food out of the esophagus, but also during the process of mechanical digestion, it's going to mix the food up with the liquid in the stomach, which is what we call gastric juice. And in the next video, we're going to look at how gastric juice is used for chemical digestion. And this mixture of partially digested food and gastric juice from the stomach, which includes most notably very, very, very strong and concentrated acid, this mixture is what we call chyme. Now, when most of the chyme is sufficiently digested during its time in the stomach, ultimately peristalsis is going to transport the food out of the stomach through yet another sphincter in the bottom of the stomach, which is what we call the pyloric sphincter. And in this case, pyloric is actually in reference to the stomach, because again, this sphincter is a gateway between the ending of the stomach and the beginning of the next organ in the digestive system, which of course are the small intestines, which are a very important organ both in the chemical digestion of food, but most importantly in absorbing the food and transporting it into the bloodstream. Now, in this video, the primary purpose is to introduce you to the structural components of the esophagus and in the stomach. So in the next video, we are going to focus entirely on how the stomach is used for chemical digestion, as there is a lot more nuance and a lot more complications involving how the stomach is used in the chemical digestion of food. So stay tuned for that in the next video.